never forget the way Commander Thorne's hand trembled just a fraction before he laid it against her skin. I was standing by the viewport, supposedly running diagnostics on the atmospheric scrubbers, but truth is, I couldn't tear my eyes away. The medical bay was awash in the low, rhythmic thrum of the bioscanners, a sound that usually sets your teeth on edge, but in that moment, it felt like the only heartbeat in the universe. Exarch Alara sat on the edge of the exam table, her posture rigid, waiting for the rejection she had been trained to expect. Her violet-hued skin seemed to shimmer under the harsh overhead lights, cooling the air around her. But Thorne didn't pull away. He didn't look at the readouts that screamed anomaly. He looked at her. I saw him press his palm flat against her abdomen, his rough, sun-scarred Terran fingers contrasting wildly with her sleek, genetically perfected form. She let out a breath that sounded like a dam breaking, her forehead resting against his chest, collapsing into the safety of him. He was the most terrified and beautiful thing I'd ever seen. But you have to understand, it wasn't supposed to end like this. To understand that embrace, you have to go back to the council chamber on Critter Prime. I was there for that too, part of the diplomatic entourage, invisible in the corner. I remember the smell of that place sterile, like ozone and judgment. Archprelate Kale sat on his raised dais, looking down at Alara like she was a broken component in a starship engine. She was an exarch, royalty by design, but the genetic audits had come back with a single damning word: incompatible. In the eyes of the Ascendancy, her inability to interface with the standard Krytetan reproductive matrix made her obsolete. Garbage. You are a dead end, Alara, Kale had said, his voice smooth and devoid of pity. So we will send you to the dead end of the galaxy. It was a political joke, a cruel punchline. Marrying her off to a Terran officer, a primitive from the Outer Rim, was meant to be a humiliation. Human DNA was considered volatile, messy, a biological chaotic variable that the refined Cretans sneered at. When we boarded the shuttle for the transfer, Alara didn't speak. She just stared out at the passing stars, her eyes dry and hard as diamonds. She thought her life was over. She thought she was walking into a prison cell. Then came the arrival at Outpost 4. I expected Thorne to be rough. Humans have a reputation, you know. Loud, brash. But when the airlock hissed open, he was standing there in a pressed dress uniform that looked a little too tight across the shoulders. He didn't offer a salute or a formal bow. He offered a hand. Alara hesitated. I saw her flinch, waiting for the sneer, waiting to be treated like the damaged goods Kale said she was. Exarch, Thorne said, and his voice was deep, grounding. I've had the quarters adjusted for your atmospheric preferences, and I read that your people value the view of the nebula. He stepped aside. He hadn't built a cell. He'd cleared the entire observation deck for her. I think that was the moment the universe shifted, though neither of them knew it yet. It wasn't the grand politics or the treaties. It was just the way he looked at her, not as a genetic failure, but as a person. That night, I saw them on the observation deck. They weren't touching. Not yet. They were just standing close enough that the heat radiating from him seemed to ward off the chill of the void. She looked at him, confused by his kindness, and for the first time since leaving Krita, her shoulders dropped. The spark wasn't an explosion. It was quiet. It was the realization that while her people saw a broken vessel, this human saw a soul. And biology? Well, biology has a funny way of adapting when you stop trying to control it. It was 3 years later when we walked back into that same council chamber, and I'll be honest, my knees were shaking. The atmosphere on Krita Prime is usually controlled, filtered to a perfect, sterile neutrality. But that day, the air felt thin, brittle, like the whole room was holding its breath, waiting for glass to shatter. I stood by the rear pillar, trying to blend into the architecture. I watched the high counselors murmuring, their robes sweeping the floor with a sound like dry leaves. Archprelate Kale was there, of course. He looked older, more pinched, sitting on his dais with the smug assurance of a man who thinks he's already won the argument. He expected Alara to return broken, or not to return at all. Then the doors groaned open. You have to picture it. Thorn walked in first, his dress uniform immaculate, chin up, looking every bit the protector. But he wasn't the focus. Elara walked beside him, hand in hand. She wasn't wearing the gray robes of an exile. She wore the deep, iridescent ceremonial armor of her ancestors, and walking between them, holding onto their parents' hands, were the twins. They were small, maybe 2 years old, with skin that held a soft, violet luminescence, and eyes that looked far too old for their faces. "You defy the terms of your banishment," Kale's voice boomed. It echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. "And you bring these abominations into the sacred hall." I saw Elara stop. She didn't shout. She didn't rage. She just squeezed Thorn's hand. I saw his knuckles turn white, the muscle in his jaw jumping as he held back, trusting her to lead this. "Not abominations, Archprelate," Elara said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Proof," Kale scoffed. He actually laughed. "Proof of your failure? Human DNA is a contaminant. It is chaotic. It ruins the purity of the design." He motioned to the guards. "Remove them. This is the part I'll never explain properly to anyone who wasn't there." The guards moved forward, huge, armored sentinels. Thorn started to step in front of his family, his hand going for a sidearm he wasn't allowed to carry, but he didn't need to. One of the twins, the girl, looked up. She didn't cry. She just tilted her head. I felt the pressure in my ears pop. The air suddenly smelled sharp, like a lightning storm. The guards stopped dead in their tracks, their heavy boots skidding on the floor as if they'd hit an invisible wall. The halberds in their hands began to hum, vibrating violently, until they were ripped from their grips and suspended in midair, spinning slowly, harmlessly, above the children's heads. Telekinesis. Eye-level, stable telekinesis. A trait the Ascendancy had been trying to breed back into their bloodline for centuries, lost to their obsession with purity. "It seems," Thorn said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice, "that human DNA acts as a universal adapter. It didn't dilute her power, Kale. It unlocked it." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was stunned. It was the sound of a worldview collapsing. I looked at Kale. His face had gone gray. He looked at those children, seeing not just the impossible, but the future he had tried to throw away. The data pads in the counselor's hands began to float, glowing with the twins' idle curiosity. Elara stepped forward, the floating weapons parting for her. She looked up at the dais, not with hatred, but with a pity that must have burned Kale worse than fire. "We are not here to fight," she said, resting her hand on her daughter's head. "We are here to show you that worth is not determined by your charts. You called us a dead end. We are the new beginning." I looked over at Thorn. He wasn't watching the guards or the council. He was looking down at his wife and children with an expression of such fierce, overwhelming pride that it made my throat tight. He caught my eye across the room and gave me a barely perceptible nod. We walked out of there without a single guard daring to lift a finger. The Reformation didn't happen overnight. Politics is slow, even when physics is rewritten in front of your face. But the legend started that day, the day the obsolete exarch in the primitive human proved that life doesn't flourish by staying the same. It flourishes by connecting. And me? I just opened the airlock for them, watching the family walk back toward their ship, hand in hand, ready to go home.